Hi, and welcome back to the channel and our series on PhD life. I'm joined today by Gemma Rides and Aysha Bellamy, and they're going to be both talking about their experiences of doing a PhD. Before we get started, actually, there's something we should probably just address because it's actually quite a special day because Aysha has actually just officially completed her PhD and is now a doctor. So congratulations, Aysha, on such an achievement. You must be very proud.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, it was great. Just can't believe it's over, really. But yeah, thank you all.
Yeah, it's certainly a kind of mixture of relief and also pride, I think, at the end of a very long journey. I would ask you how your Viva went, but maybe we'll have you back on another time when you can talk about that, because that's something else we'll want to explore in this series. But today what we're going to do is we're going to talk about teaching duties on a PhD. I know both of you, as well as when I was a PhD student, did teaching whilst doing my PhD. So I think probably the best thing to start off is just to kind of give a bit of context to our listeners who may not be familiar with the department that we're housed in, and also you two individuals. What exactly is what teaching duties you actually do here?
So I am actually on a graduate teaching associate studentship pathway, which means that my PhD is split over 4 years rather than the typical 3. So I have typically more teaching duties than people on a typical studentship. I teach on a first year undergraduate psychology course, statistics and research methods. I demonstrate in workshops once a week, and I also have a lab class once a week where we kind of build on the topics that they've learned in their lecture.
Yeah, so I think it's probably just useful then. It sounds to me like the students get taught something in their lecture, and then they go into these kind of small groups with you. And Aysha, I think you do the same sort of role as well, where you kind of more work to them in a kind of small group setting, kind of reinforcing what they learned, just checking that they understood the content and doing additional activities. Is that kind of correct? Is that a good summation of what it actually is that you do?
Yeah, I think that's correct. It's a little bit more informal than lectures as well, and the small group discussions, it's more kind of discussion based rather than lectures and taking notes. Sure.
And Gemma, you mentioned that your specific kind of scholarship actually has kind of a large component of teaching in yours, but Aysha, yours isn't, and mine wasn't as well. So I think it's probably just useful for sort of listeners to kind of understand that teaching as part of your PhD is kind of a common thing that PhD students do, and so it's quite useful to kind of get a bit of an understanding about what you might be doing as a PhD student outside of necessarily the research that you'll do, but on the kind of teaching dimension, which is why we're talking about it today. Just something that I think is probably useful for maybe some of our listeners to kind of understand, and I guess it's a kind of good question to start with, but did either of you actually do any teaching or have any kind of teaching experience before starting all this?
Absolutely not. I had no teaching experience at all.
Me neither. But I do think you kind of pick up skills during your undergrad that helps, like, all the public speaking that you kind of do. Like with me, I sort of did those tours on open days. You see the people in the bright orange jumpers and lead people around. Just stuff like that. Like it really kind of gets you used to public speaking at least. But yeah, I had no formal teaching experience at all either.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any teaching experience myself. And I think, Aysha, you're very correct that actually, although it kind of seems kind of scary, there's probably the backdrop of things that you might have done in your undergraduate degree or maybe have done elsewhere outside of your degree that actually probably has quite a lot of translatable sort of use. But I suppose then perhaps part of the question that maybe some of our listeners might be wondering is if, we all had no teaching experience, they might also have no teaching experience. So is it just a case that sort of week one, start of your PhD, all right, you're going to be teaching this, off you go, and you're kind of thrown to the lions, so to speak? Or was there any kind of help and support that was kind of put in place to kind of, support you as you kind of went on your teaching journey? Maybe you could just talk a little bit about the kind of things that helped you as you started out doing your teaching career.
I think for me, I did sort of almost throw myself to lions a bit in week 1 because I kind of had a bit of a late start my PhD, and it was just kind of like, oh, this is the day I'm meant to be teaching. Okay, I'm just going to rock up into a room and see what happens. So that was quite a nice, fun surprise. But I think we do have a lot of support there. Obviously, your supervisor, usually you kind of tend to demonstrate an area that's relevant to them, so you can always go to them for advice. But also the other PhD students are really helpful. So for example, me, like we said earlier, I wasn't a full-on teaching associate, but I was a demonstrator, and there were other people in the office who were demonstrating on the same course. So they were like always really helpful, sort of telling me this is kind of like what it'll be like this week, especially the older ones who'd kind of already done it for a year. They'd be like, oh, this is what this week's going to be like. And you kind of get a lot of help that way. And plus the people you demonstrate for are always super approachable. So there's usually nothing much to worry about. You can email lecturers at any time with any of your questions that you have. Some courses may even do like a weekly meetup, just to like sort of ease the new demonstrators in. So that was quite helpful as well for the statistics courses. But yes, there's always a lot of support at the university. And then more broadly than that, both me and Gemma I've done, Gemma might be doing still, which is a great like teaching qualification to give you sort of ready, I guess, for teaching. And that's also really helpful.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking Instill obviously is here at the college, but I think maybe in other universities they call it something different, but it's kind of a broader qualification that you get, which kind of gives you extra knowledge and practice with sort of teaching, sort of handy tips, useful skills, understanding what good practice is and that sort of stuff. So you do get some sort of training. Gemma, have you got anything to add to that in regards to kind of support that you had when you started?
Yeah, definitely. I think as well for the course that I teach on, all of the slides and everything from my lab class are already prepared in advance, so I don't have to worry about that. The course coordinator will also, or the person who completed the lecture that week, will put notes under the PowerPoint slides to kind of talk about the task that you're supposed to be running. I know our department's really friendly, and I knew there was so much support. If you're not sure, it's absolutely okay to ask. I think like we all said, nobody really has experience before doing this. A handful of people might, but I get feedback on what you're doing as well, and let people know that you're new, and they will always be there to support you.
Yeah, and I think there's something else to be kind of said, and maybe this is something we should cover in a different topic at some point, this idea of sort of imposter syndrome. But I think often one of the worries is that you don't feel like you really know the stuff. You worry that maybe you don't know enough, but actually the truth is you got onto a PhD because you do know a lot of stuff. And it's one of those things we're often quite negative about how much maybe we do know versus how much other people know. And so one of those things when I started out was always kind of feeling a little bit like, I don't know enough about this. But actually, once you've done a couple of sort of lab classes and a couple of demonstrations, you actually do realize you really actually do understand the content really well, much more so than you kind of genuinely thought. And even then, obviously, as Gemma points out, you kind of normally get lots and lots of information, the slides pre-made for you, lots of notes underneath the slides, just to kind of help you prepare in advance for those kind of classes. So something, and maybe this is particularly relevant for me, but maybe it might also apply to both of you, but actually I had a sort of student, sort of an ex-student of mine who I've been working with on trying to publish some research, who's interested in doing a PhD, and she asked me about sort of teaching on a PhD, and she asked me the question because she's very nervous. She's not someone who particularly felt very confident in public speaking. Sort of asked the question, does that kind of feeling ever really go away? Now, for me, I was super nervous when I first started teaching. Never really was a very confident public speaker. For me, at least anyway, the nerves have gone away. And now look at me, I've decided to put on a YouTube channel where the whole world can see it. So I think that's kind of a testament that, for me, at least anyway, those nerves do go away. But what about for the two of you? Did you find that you were quite anxious when you started? And have you felt that that's kind of improved?
I was so nervous. I think for me as well, I went from being a student to, a teacher in 6 months. I graduated from my undergraduate and then 6 months later, I was teaching on the same course I'd just graduated from. So it felt very odd. And like you said, Sam, imposter syndrome, I was like, whoa, I shouldn't be teaching. But actually, you do know the stuff, you have the confidence. And I think it's really helped my nerves as well to observe other people teaching, kind of get tips. And I feel quite lucky to have the same lab class every week. So you kind of build a rapport with students, they get to know you. It's not, I don't know any other PhD students that go in, their first teaching experience is a lecture in front of 300 people. It's quite nice to start off with small group teaching anyway.
Yeah, that would be scary. But yeah, just to echo that, I completely agree. The first time you teach, maybe you'll be nervous, understandably. But to be honest with you, because it's the same faces, there definitely gets to a point where you're not nervous, you're just excited. Like for me, when, over Christmas break, we had a nice break. But then when we're coming back to teaching, I was actually really excited the first lecture back because I was like, I'm seeing these people again. Oh, I hope they had a good Christmas. So you do get that rapport, and that really helps to be teaching the same people again.
Yeah, and I think it's also worthwhile pointing out that, at least in my experience, and I'm sure it's the same for the both of you as well, they're absolutely lovely. They're very, you often worry that students are going to be mean and so forth, but it never really is that case. It's just your kind of mind playing tricks on you. And something that I did when I remember the first week when I taught, because I was very, very nervous, was just to be kind of candid about it and just say, look, I'm quite nervous about this, bear with me. And they were all very kind about it. And after about 10 minutes of teaching, I realized what really was there to worry about. I kind of calmed down a little bit at that point and everything went fine. And now look where I am. So I think it's one of those things that often you just need to kind of get into it to then realize actually it's not as bad as it seems. But even then, with just more practice and with more time, you will become more confident and you will grow as someone who can speak confidently and so forth. And also, Gemma, just to kind of sort of reiterate what you said, it's not necessarily like when you're teaching on a PhD or week one, okay, we've got this lecture on personality theory. I know it's not anything you really know about, but can you go and put some slides together and teach 300 students? It's, working in a small group on something that, you have slides given to you in advance, and something that, having been through an undergraduate degree, you should have some confidence and knowledge about, say, for example, in your case, research methods and statistical analysis. So I guess sort of one more final question that I have, maybe you can kind of explain to me your personal sort of opinions on this, but some of our viewers might wonder, if you're doing a PhD, which is a research-based degree, then why necessarily are you sort of teaching? What kind of benefits does it really have to you to engage in teaching? So maybe you can just explain, obviously you're both at slightly different stages of your kind of process. Gemma, you've started not too long ago. Aysha, now you're near the end. Well, I actually have reached the end. Maybe you can just explain a little bit about how the teaching aspect of that has really kind of helped you along the way.
Yeah, definitely. So I think the first thing to point out is that, I think it's a bit of a myth to kind of separate research from teaching. Teaching-focused career pathways also do research, and research-focused pathways will also have to teach at some point. So even if you're starting the PhD with the mindset of, I want to stay in research, I want to be, an academic, that actually you are still going to teach sometimes. So it's a good skill to have. It's a skill that's really great to have on your CV. So any university that gives you the opportunity to teach whilst a PhD student, you should definitely take it, because it's a skill that's going to be great for your future development. But more broadly than that, it's good to have the experience of, actually talking to someone about your PhD and your research ideas. Because even in statistics, a lot of the time, like, students love a real life example, right? And they love it when I actually talk about my research and my PhD and what tests did I use? They just love to hear about that stuff, to actually see it pays off. And there's a reason why they have to learn all these boring tests. But also, genuinely, something that surprised me, it helped me so much with my Viva. Students always will have some questions, and maybe not in the first couple of labs, but once they've warmed up to you and they know you're approachable, they're often like, oh, why do we do this? Why that? They have all these questions about the process, and it's stuff sometimes that even I haven't thought about before. So it's like, it's good for me as I get to think on my feet and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a good question. I think maybe this. And, we kind of have these discussions. And in the end, it kind of hit me a couple of days before my Viva. I was a lot less nervous about it than what I thought I'd be. And it kind of hit me that one of the reasons why is because I'm used to answering questions on the spot, because you just get that when you teach naturally. So it does give you that kind of, I guess, bravery to approach situations like the Viva or conferences in general, where you're going to get asked questions about your work. If you're used to handling like student questions, that's going to be like the next logical step for you. So I think it's a really good practice for, talking about your research more generally.
And Gemma, what about yourself?
That is such a good point, Aysha. I'm definitely going to keep it in mind for when I eventually do my Viva too. Something I'd say is that when I started my PhD, obviously knew I was going to be doing teaching, but I've actually enjoyed the teaching aspect a lot more than I thought I would. And because I was very much like, I'm on this teaching pathway, but, research is where my heart is. But actually, I'm really considering, for future careers, I actually would really like to have like a really good balance between teaching and research. But I don't think I would have known that unless I'd done the teaching in my PhD.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm happy to do teaching focus now. It really does open up your eyes to like another career pathway.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, I'm a teaching focused lecturer myself. So, there is this kind of whole other pathway that isn't really talked about so much because it's not the kind of traditional thing that people think about when doing a PhD. But certainly, at least for our experiences, we've all really, really enjoyed our teaching and consider it as a viable career pathway. So certainly it gives you that good early experience to wonder if that's an option for you. Very finally, before we go, do you have any kind of final advice maybe to someone who's about to start their PhD, might be told by their department that they're going to be doing a bit of teaching? What advice would you give them?
I think one thing that I'd say, is time management. You obviously have a lot of work when you're doing a PhD, a bit overwhelming, but planning your time out, having specific days for your teaching, getting your to-do list out, and as well when you're doing marking, it's really great to know that can kind of take up more of your time. So kind of communicating that with your supervisor, I'm marking for the next 2 weeks, my replies might be a bit slower, etc.
Yeah, definitely. Just to echo that, it's something I never did and I really should have done, but you can put it in your Gantt chart, your timeline, whatever your uni does. When you're planning your timeline of the PhD, do you actually like pencil in, like, this is when I'll be marking, this is when I'll be teaching. If that's a commitment you might have, you are allowed to do that. And it's helpful for everyone on your team to know when you're going to be busy with other stuff, definitely. And I guess just returning to the imposter syndrome thing, like, so many PhD students go straight from an undergrad like Gemma did, which is very brave. I went straight from a master's, which I think is more typical, but still, I would actually demonstrate on master's content as well, whilst I was still waiting for my final exam results from my own master's. So, you have this feeling of, I'm not qualified to teach these guys. I don't even know yet if I've got a master's, really. But it's really all in your head. Like Sam said earlier, if you've been offered the PhD, they've seen some potential in you. So, definitely don't worry too much if you're still completing a master's or even an undergrad. If you've been offered the PhD and they've said you can teach straight away, then they have faith that, you've got that degree classification and they have faith that you know what you're talking about. So I guess just, take a bit of pride in yourself. If you've been offered a PhD of teaching in it, you've really impressed someone, basically. So well done you.
I think that's a great point to leave it on. So thank you both for taking the time out to talk a little bit about the excellent work that you've been doing teaching wise. And hopefully I'll have you back on the channel at some point in the future to talk more about PhD. Thanks.
Yeah, love to be back. Thank you.
Thank you for watching the Psychology Debrief. If you have any suggestions for new topics, quizzes, or any other content psychology related, feel free to get in touch via email or Twitter. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Bye!